consumers don't necessarily know what they want.
What's happening today is that this hunger to grow fast and this lack of education has reduced marketers to communication.
It was a turnaround story. Why would you say it's a turnaround story?
Because it was declining for the last 3 years.
Okay, sales
minus 20% was declining.
Okay. What is the typical process of coming up with a new product or a new product innovation, right?
Yeah. If you fail on a big brand, it is a bigger kalank, right? If you fail on a small brand, it's not. If you can identify an unmet need and create a product for it, nothing like it.
Right.
Look at UPI. Who would have thought we will be transferring money to each other digitally through the air?
Yeah.
Right? That was an unmet need, but somebody imagined it. So I think the imagination is the biggest superpower a business has, not just a marketer. So if you can imagine a better future and you can create it, you can build a big business out of it.
I don't come across many marketers today who would be involved, let alone be aware about the process. Welcome to yet another episode of the Slow Marketing Podcast, and today I have a special guest, Rashi Goyal. Rashi comes with over 24 years of experience working with some of the best brands in the business. Some of them are Amazon, PepsiCo, Coke, L'Oreal, and last she was the marketing director for India at Amazon. So welcome, Rashi. It's great to have you. And
Thank you for having me.
Before I forget, I must tell everyone, Rashi runs one of the best thought leader newsletter in the country by the name Performonks.
Performonks.
Have I pronounced it all right?
That's fine.
And if you are a marketeer and looking for some good content on marketing, you should definitely look it up. So Rashi, thank you once again for coming for this podcast. And I would love to have you tell our viewers about your career and how it progressed over the years.
Sure. It's a long story, but I'll try to tell it in brief. So I started my career as a sales officer with L'Oreal India. And at that time, L'Oreal was a startup. So I learned how to really build a business from scratch through marketing. So the headline on my career is the single biggest thing I have learned is how do you actually grow your top line and manage your bottom line through the power of brand and marketing.
Right.
Right? And not just brand, but brand powered 4 Ps. Right. So I learned how to do that for premium products or masstige products on L'Oreal. Then I had the good fortune of joining the University of Marketing itself, Unilever, where I worked on brands like Lakme, Close Up, which were turnaround stories.
Right.
And then I worked on Lux, which was really about how do you scale a brand across multiple regions. After that, I joined Coke, where I was working on flavors, Sprite, Fanta, Limca, all the non-cola brands.
Okay.
And there I learned how do you market on ground and how do you treat each state as a country.
Right.
So the federation of states we have, how do we market differently while keeping the brand common?
Right.
So that was superb learning. And then I took a career break and I went to Stanford, did a 1-year MBA.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so they have a special MBA called the Sloan Fellowship. It's for people with work experience. I did that, came back, and I joined PepsiCo. They were setting up an innovation team.
Okay.
And it was a very new idea. What they said was that you think of a blue sky new product, launch it and run the P&L.
So that was the mandate.
That was the mandate. And this was very different from other companies where, different people create innovation products and then a separate team runs it and takes it to market.
Typically an R&D team which would think of the new innovation and then...
Yeah. So there is let's say you take Unilever. So there is a separate innovation team that works very closely with R&D. They're like product managers in tech. So that equivalent. And they dream up new products for unmet needs. And then so it takes 2 to 3 years if they're lucky, to create that product, and then
Right.
they hand it over to the activation team that takes it to market.
Got it.
But Pepsi said so, and there is no right or wrong in this, but what happens is that lack of ownership. So if I've created an idea and I give it to you to sell, if it doesn't sell, you'll say idea galat tha. Then I'll say idea to theek tha,
Right.
but you didn't, go
Sell
to
it
market well.
Yeah.
So Pepsi said, you know what, we don't want anything of that. You create the product, you manufacture it, and you run the P&L. So that's what I was doing. So
Got it.
launched different seeds like a nutrition biscuit for Andhra Pradesh, launched Lipton iced tea, did the groundwork for Sting, which was launched, I think, 3 to 4 years later.
Right.
And after that, more companies. I then worked with Nestle, and my last role was with Amazon, as you said.
Got it. No, very interesting, Rashi. In fact, the part that you mentioned about being at Pepsi, right, for the innovation,
Yes.
right? So you mentioned that typically it takes around 2 to 3 years to think of that product and have everything ready, around it before the activation teams takes it to market, right?
Yes.
So if we think of it in today's parlance, right, where you have D2C brands and you will often hear founders saying, okay, we thought of this idea 6 months back and now, we have launched it, right?
Yes.
So have people figured out a magic formula to squeeze that 3 years into 6 months, or are they really missing out on something?
I think the answer is somewhere in the middle, right? So what happens in large companies is that the risk of failure is probably much bigger.
Right.
Because so what happens in a large company? There is a huge sales force, and the core products are selling so well already that the core sales force meets their targets through core products.
So you have that cushion.
You have that cushion. It's the innovator's dilemma,
Right.
right? So getting a new idea to clear the stage gate in a large company takes time. So that's one, because the company's DNA is geared to growing the core.
Right.
The second reason is that if your base is so big, let's say if you have a 3,500 crore brand, any new innovation you launch in the first year, if it crosses 100 crores, you're really lucky.
Right.
Right? So in the first year, it'll be 16 crores, 20 crores. So I've already mentioned the GTM support reduces, but if you are a 16 to 20 crores new innovation, then really doing the due diligence to prove to the board, the CEO, that I need resources to support this 16 crore brand, which may scale to 100 in 3 years. So they automatically create multiple loopholes for you to jump through, so that you correct your thinking perfectly. So because you can't afford to fail.
Stakes are so high.
Stakes are high because if you fail on a big brand, it is a bigger kalank, right? If you fail on a small brand, it's not. So I think in big companies, the lack of agility has been created as an innovator's dilemma to create checks and balances.
Right.
Could it be faster? Absolutely. So on Lakme, we launched new products within less than 6 months.
Oh.
Right. So in great companies have different rules for different
how they're approaching this.
How they're approaching it. So for Close Up, for example, we had an innovation which was lying in the R&D department, and I wish I had a pen to show you, but it was a core in sheath innovation. So it was, imagine a gel. So you know how you have ballpoint pens?
Right.
There is a refill inside and then a transparent body outside. So it's a core in sheath. You can see 2 toothpastes, right? This was lying in the R&D because no one could crack a proposition for that toothpaste. So we managed to crack it. And so the time it took us, I now don't remember, but I remember it took us less than 2 years to launch. Maybe we did it within 1 year.
Right.
So there is no hard and fast rule that it takes 2 years or 3 years, but the due diligence that large companies do is much more. They also have very detailed quality checks, shelf life. So to do a shelf life for a product for the India environment, you need 3 to 6 months.
Right.
Because you will do a shelf check in 48 degrees, in 51 degrees.
Understood.
which is so the FSSAI requirements, all the quality procedures, every checklist is ticked. Whereas when you're a D2C brand, you don't have the weight of legacy.
But you mentioned about unmet needs,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And then obviously all of us know about Steve Jobs' philosophy of, right, that consumers don't necessarily know what they
Yeah.
want.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So how do you look at it when you're launching a new brand? So do you really start at what is the unmet need, or do you really start at, okay, I have a innovative product idea, right? So for example, in case of Close Up, what you're mentioning, there was a product innovation,
Yeah.
not necessarily at that point of time an unmet need which was being solved with that new
Yes.
product, right?
Yes.
So how should one think about it?
I think again the answer is it depends. So if you can identify an unmet need and create a product for it, nothing like it.
Right.
Look at UPI. Who would have thought we will be transferring money to each other digitally through
Right.
the air?
Yeah.
Right? That was an unmet need. But was it an articulated unmet need? No. Right? Somebody imagined it. So I think the imagination is the biggest superpower a business has, not just a marketer. So if you can imagine a better future and you can create it, you can build a big business out of it. On the other hand, if you're an existing big brand, you need to fill the empty spaces in the market. So if there is already a trusted platform that this brand has,
Right.
then you can launch more products under it
Right.
because people will buy it. Will it still be as big as the red core Close Up? No. But that added strong teeth credentials to Close Up, which it lacked. But in a market like Philippines, that same core in sheath with the white inside got 5% share within the first year of launch, because it was a more powerful brand over there. So it's context dependent, and I think you can come both ways at a new
So there's
innovation.
no right or wrong way.
There is no right or wrong answer. The only thing that's common is imagination. You've got to imagine a better future.
And what is the typical process of, say, coming up with a new product or a new product innovation, right?
Yeah.
Let's keep aside whether it'll take 3 years or say 6 months.
Yes.
But there must be like these 4 or 5 steps that must be followed. So
Yes.
what would be those?
So I'll share the Unilever methodology, and then I'll share how food products do it. So it's different for food versus non-food.
Right.
So for non-food, what happens is it all starts with consumer intimacy.
Okay.
So in Unilever, the rule was you cannot speak in a meeting unless you have spent 100 meaningful hours with a consumer. And there was a whole machinery in place where any brand manager could, on the system, request for consumer work.
Okay.
And go and meet consumers.
Oh, interesting.
So you go with your set of questions or whatever your hypothesis is, or to understand what she's using, why she's using, and you finish your 100 consumer
So you're saying there was a machinery, there was a team which would facilitate just
consumer visits.
Okay.
It was called consumer home visits. So the more you meet consumers, more you can start identifying the soft tissue of unmet needs. And when you do that, then you start imagining. You say, oh, but what if it could be like this?
Right.
What if the chair could have a washable upholstery? What if, the shampoo had a cap at the bottom to take the leftover residue shampoo, which mothers add water.
Right.
So you observe without judgment. So when the shampoo bottle is getting over, we all have added water, shaken it up and used it.
Right.
What if there was a cap in the middle?
Right.
But so you observe how the consumer is behaving. So if there is a adjustment the consumer is making, if the consumer is sort of doing things differently than what you imagined, if the consumer is openly complaining or openly praising, there is something hidden under that. So find those insights.
Right.
Imagine a better world. Once you have that, write it down as a product idea. So then there was a process in Unilever where all the product ideas went into consumer research.
Okay.
Very, very rough research where I give you 10 product ideas and you say, हाँ, अच्छा लगा, खरीदेंगे. So I like it and I might buy it, claim level.
Understood.
So you get a short list. So the truth to innovation is that your funnel needs to be very, very wide.
Understood.
Feed as many ideas as you can get, and then it starts getting narrow.
Right.
It's a
So
funnel.
you shouldn't start with, say, just 2-3 ideas. and
No,
value.
start with as many as you can. Put it through the process. So first is, did I like the idea? Might I buy it? And then you start fleshing it out. What will it look like? What is the benefit? What is the emotional benefit? What's the need it solves for you? And then you take it through the stage gate. You do qualitative researches, you do quantitative researches, and then you do a factory check. Can you produce it? What is the cost? Will we make money?
So, for example, out of 10 ideas that one has, if you go next step, and say at a production level, there is some complication. So, do you
Yes.
now come back to the
Drawing board.
Drawing board.
If it is a great idea, you do, and you try and make it work.
So there must be a lot of these back and forth before you can freeze on one.
And see, the marketeer doesn't do it alone, right? So from day one, it's a cross-functional team that works on an innovation together.
But why are marketers today not involved in this process? I mean, I very rarely, and obviously, given that I run an agency, I get to meet a lot of marketers, right? I don't come across many marketers today who would be involved, let alone be aware about the process. So what has changed?
Are these FMCG marketeers?
Yeah, I mean FMCG, a lot of services would be say slightly different, but even say at a service offering level, right, where you are packaging a new service offering, I'm sure that's equivalent to say a product innovation, right? So have you also observed that?
I have observed this, although I have to say my exposure is not as much as you have, because you're working with clients. I think there are 2-3 reasons for this. I think the first reason is that the way we are teaching in MBA colleges today,
right,
or when we were teaching when I was a kid, we don't teach marketing this way. We teach theoretical marketing. We don't teach practical marketing. So whatever Unilever does, whatever Coke does, they have created the playbook themselves. And then they train the marketers to work a certain way. What's happening today is that this hunger to grow fast and this lack of education has reduced marketers to communication. Right? There are founders who don't have a marketing background.
right.
See, at the very core, what is marketing? Marketing says put the consumer first and then find his and her unmet needs and solve it for them.
Right.
And you have different tools. The 4 Ps are your tools.
Right.
The product is the business.
Yeah.
Right? So this is marketing. It's just called marketing, but it's also business. And somehow people are forgetting it. And they feel that the marketeer is just a communications person. I think that's what's happening.
But I think it has to do with both the marketeer as well as, say, people who are setting up the organizational mix, right? So, for example, at Unilever, what you're saying is that a marketeer is expected to do some of these things, right? Whereas in a lot of other organizations, their role is also limited to say, okay, just focus on communication, etc.
Yes.
But I think in that case, they would lack a lot of insight that one would get, if they're involved in all these other parts of the process as well. Yeah. But I do agree with you on the education bit. I think that's a larger problem that should be solved for.
Yeah.
So moving on, Rashi, we were talking about, the turnaround stories, and you had managed or sort of led some of those as well in your career, right? Tell us about those.
So let me tell you about Lakme, because that was the first turnaround I did. So Lakme was a brand that Unilever purchased from the Tatas, right? Simon Tata had started Lakme, and it was the pioneering beauty brand of India. What a beautiful brand. So Lakme had 2 parts. One was color cosmetics and one was skincare. So I was part of the skincare team. And what had happened was, so So the macro point is that as brands age and their external context changes, they have to keep refreshing themselves, right? So Lakme didn't refresh itself in an era when there was L'Oreal, Garnier, Estee Lauder, Revlon, all of these international brands came in and they repositioned Lakme as a fuddy-duddy Indian brand. And then Lakme Skin was always the bridesmaid to color cosmetics, which was more glamorous.
Right.
So when you start a turnaround for a brand, look at the business metrics first.
But sorry to cut you. It was a turnaround story. Why would you say it's a turnaround story?
Because it was declining for the last 3 years.
Okay. Sales
minus 20% was declining.
Okay.
So the first thing I did was, of course, my bosses told me to go do market visits. And when you go and do market visits on loved brands, the retailers are very angry with you. They shout at you if you're a brand manager and you go in. And they say, "Aapne to kharab kar diya brand, ye wo, whatever." So you realize that the brand is in trouble. So if the retailer is shouting at you, your brand is in trouble.
That's the red flag.
That's the red flag. Okay. And that happened. So what was happening on ground was you sell one lipstick, you make 500 rupees. But to make 500 rupees, you have to sell 10 moisturizers. Because the one moisturizer is 39, 49 rupees. Skincare is cheaper than color cosmetics. So the focus of the sales team was more on selling color cosmetics. The sales team will always take the easy way out. Whatever can make them meet their value incentive faster. Right?
Right.
So the sales team focus was low. Then the other thing happened in beauty and cosmetics was L'Oreal had come in and they had L'Oreal and Revlon and they had started buying shelf spaces on retail. So jo dikhta hai wo bikta hai.
Right.
So when you go, you see a L'Oreal shelf, and I was the one who helped them set up that for my area as a sales officer. But there were no shelves for Lakme. And Lakme color cosmetics used to be on the counter in that plastic, stand. But there was nothing for Lakme. So not only is the salesperson not focusing on my brand, but also there is no pull visibility for my customer.
So the own brands were cannibalizing.
No, it wasn't an own brand. So you cannot, if this is your, if you're on a table, if you have a counter of the retail shop, all color cosmetics are on the table. Okay, and he has to keep it.
Right.
Maybe you're paying him shelf space.
Right.
But behind the retailer is a shelf where your skincare should have been there. So there was no cannibalization from color cosmetics for the consumer. There was cannibalization for the sales guy. But when the consumer is coming to the shop, she is, enamored by these new, shiny international brands.
Right.
And even if she was a Lakme loyalist, she can't see it in the shop. So she forgets to buy it. So the first pillar of rejuvenation was getting back
The visibility.
Getting back share of mind from sales team, and getting beauty advisors to start selling skincare. Because even the beauty advisors used to sell cosmetics. It's more glamorous to sell lipstick now. So getting back frontline sale visibility. The second was, if you're coming up with great looking products and great ideas of moisturizers, ours was a fuddy-duddy moisturizer. So second was product relaunch. And the third one was communication relaunch. What do we stand for? So these were the three things that we worked on. Yeah. And within 1 year, the brand turned around 40%. So minus 20 to plus 19 was the turnaround. Just getting the fundamentals right.
Actually, this reminds me, and we were chatting about this Jaguar rebranding. And I was just seeing online a lot of people, there's a lot of backlash against the new brand identity. But again, I think people lack the context, right? Why is it happening?
Yes.
Was there a need? And what is the unmet need, or what is the product line looking like going forward, right?
Yes.
So I think marketing is also a lot about context, right? In what context you are doing,
absolutely,
taking various initiatives. Yeah. So that's I think very important, but people jump to the conclusion a lot of
Absolutely.
times.
Now, I hope the Jaguar teaser leads to something which is car centric. And this reminds me of another case study. So when the new CEO of Tiffany took over, I think this was 2 years ago. So the Tiffany Robin Blue is world famous. It's I think it's a patented color for them. He changed a few stores to yellow. He made Tiffany yellow. Now, this was as shocking as the Jaguar teaser. But it came with a yellow diamond launch. So he launched a yellow diamond, painted Tiffany yellow for maybe 6 months. Everybody was shocked, but that worked so well. Because it was linked to a product sale. Right?
Yeah. No, great. And Rashi also talked about blue sky launches, right? Where you had an open canvas and you were asked to solve a problem or maybe increase the top line.
Yes.
And we were talking about Ask Nestle, one of the initiative that you took, which again, I mean, it's at a crossroad of, I think, a marketing gig and also digital transformation gig in some way.
Yes.
So tell us about that.
So Nestle is one of the few companies that invests in its corporate brand, right? And so I was tasked with thinking about our corporate brand. And when you look at Nestle, it's at the end of the day a nutrition company, right? Its origins were in nutrition. And so when we started looking at what do consumers want when it comes to nutrition, we came upon this insight that, of course, in India, after cricket and Bollywood, it's kids. Right? How do we grow kids is super important. And so when we studied what people are talking about on Google, what are the number one queries, what do people call on our call center and ask, moms and dads are super worried about feeding nutritious, good food to their kids. Why? So that they can grow well, right? So growth and linkage to good food is enmeshed in our culture. Nestle stands for good food, good life. So what was the unmet need there? It was information asymmetry. I know I need to feed my child good food, nutritious food, but I don't know what. And second is personalized information was missing. So if I'm a Bengali, I'm a fish eater, I Google, I get vegetarian recipes or I get mutton recipes, but I don't want mutton, I want fish. So give me personalized nutrition information for my lifestyle.
Understood.
And the other personalization was, but my child is 3 feet tall. But my daughter is only 2 feet tall. So personalize it to my child's body type. Right? So we said that, so this was what the consumer was telling us. And we said, the answer to this is not an ad. Let's not make a big purposive ad ki bhai hum good food, good life dete hain. As a corporate brand and as an honest, authentic company, you've got to walk the talk. So how can we help moms and dads understand what to feed their kids? So Ask Nestle was a service brand. And the only way you can deliver this at scale is digitally. So we created this website where you can come in and you can input your child's height, weight, where do you live, what kind of diet you follow, and you will get a personalized meal plan.
Wow.
And then it continued from there. And all the data is out there. You input your child's height and weight, and we can immediately share with you where he or she is on the growth curve of India. Because all the government data is there in ICMR. So it was just, again, the data stares you in the face. And then you need imagination to turn it into a business.
But it must have been a mammoth task to get all this content which is customized.
It was very difficult, and especially in a traditional company. How do you get alignment, and then how do you get the resources to create content at scale?
Right.
So it took some convincing, but the leadership is very, very forward-looking. And in marketing-led companies, they get it. They get consumer backward logic.
Right.
Right? You don't have to push that hard.
But how do you define success of some of these initiatives?
Yes. So the success in the short term is talkability. And I don't mean, oh, I went viral. Talkability in the right quarters. So we had a call center. We had a call center. So people started calling up and saying, I saw your Ask Nestle ad. Can I speak to a nutritionist? So we started adding services to it. You know, when you run into people, because this was a SEC metro kind of idea in the beginning. And then later we went into languages. So when you run into people you know, and they start talking to you about it, then you know it's working. Right. But the real ROI for these initiatives is in brand equity. So after 1 year of launch, we did a brand equity survey of what does Nestle stand for. And we have a running survey. And all our scores on brand I trust, brand I will advocate for, etc. went up 20, 30 bips.
But how do you attribute, like, why would you attribute this initiative to the uptick that you saw?
Because this was the only initiative we did for corporate brand.
Understood. Got it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, Rashi, you've done like legacy, I'll call them legacy businesses all your life, right? And I'm sure, at least in your head and partially in your newsletter, you have some of those playbooks in place, right?
Yeah.
If you have to take out some of those things and translate that for, say, the new age D2C businesses, right? What would be some of your recommendations or some of the things that D2C businesses should not miss out on?
I think the biggest thing is find those unmet needs. And, you know, and more than unmet needs, find those differentiated propositions you can go to market with. And don't compromise on the quality of your product, right? So find those needs, even if they're slivers of differences, you know, and build a great product. Don't compromise on the product. And the third thing is get your unit profitability right. How long will you lose investors' money, right? Can we build a business where we are making money within the first 1 year? I think these are the three fundamentals that I would look at. Right. Very broad, but
yeah. But say, for example, you had this entire write-up around Mokobara, the luggage brand, right? And I think they've done a phenomenal job, and especially some of their partnerships. For example, they recently partnered with Indigo, which I think was a very clever move.
Outstanding.
Which, by the way, I feel partnership is one area or one aspect that a lot of marketeers don't look at as a part of their marketing mix. So what do you think about, say, Mokobara? If you have to summarize whatever you're finding and whatever you're reading is?
Yeah. So I think Mokobara is a very interesting example, and Mokobara reminds me of method. So what Mokobara teaches me is you can take one aspect of the marketing mix and really differentiate on that. So they took design, not even functionality as much. So they took design and they really differentiated on that. Right? And luggage as an industry was pretty static. Like there are those luggage brands that we all use. But they said, no, I'm going to disrupt this industry. Method had done the same thing in cleaning products. Method had signed up with IDEO. This is like 15 years ago, right? They signed up with IDEO and they created beautiful looking bottles for toilet cleaners, for dishwash, for floor cleaners. Imagine disrupting Harpic through design, right? And they said, of course, we are sustainable liquids and we clean better and so on. But the differentiator was design. And this was an era when people put in a bottle of hand wash in their washroom. But here there was a beautiful bottle with amazing fragrances.
Right.
And that was a disruptor. That's what Mokobara is doing to luggage. The second thing Mokobara did was, they said the consumer buys luggage maybe thrice in their life, especially in India, right? We are not high consumers. So they said, so my need state is not long commutes. My need state is short commutes. So then they gave themselves the permission to get into backpacks and handbags and so on, and everything was differentiated through design. So I thought that was very, very interesting.
So is this what you'll call the business of one
Category of one.
category of
Yes, absolutely. So
tell our audience a bit about that.
Yeah.
I find it very interesting, but
I'm a big fan of category of one.
yeah.
And I think this applies both to businesses and to people as personal brands, right? And category of one really comes from this thinking that we all spend our lives trying to be better than the other,
Right.
right? So this competitive spirit is inculcated into us from the time we are in school. Oh, you got 11 marks, I got 12, and so on, right? So it's all about being better than the other person. But category of one says, don't be better, be the only. Find out what you are really good at. Your DNA wires you for something.
Isn't that the toughest part to
It
find?
is.
What is
Yeah.
that one thing?
Yeah, that's why. So there aren't that many category of one businesses. So
Give me a few examples which you'll call
Mokobara is, I think it's a category of one business.
where that one is design. Like that single thing is design.
Design, short commutes, yes. And really investing money behind getting London designers to do it. So yes, I think Mokobara is a category of one. I wrote about Traya. Traya hair is a category of one, where it's a phygital product to help you tackle your hair care needs, especially baldness. So it's a very difficult problem to solve, but it's a category of one business. Pool is a category of one business, and they started with recycling flowers.
How's category of one different from a USP?
A USP is your unique selling proposition. So you can be 5 heeing brands in the market, and every heeing brand can have a separate USP. And USP is very communications forward. A category of one business is where your business model itself is so unique that you're uncopyable. Right?
So it has nothing to do with your positioning per se.
Your positioning flows from that.
Flows from that. Interesting. And you spoke about that an individual can also be. Tell me about that.
So we were talking about creators before this, right? Okay. So let's go historic. Leonardo da Vinci was a category of one business. If he were a creator today, he would be earning in millions if he wanted to.
Right.
So why was he a category of one business? Because he just followed his heart. He followed his curiosity. He was a true polymath. And he earned his money and his keep by fiddling with different experiments. That's a category of one business, right? In today's world, who is a category? Trump is a category of one business. He's so distinctive and so differentiated.
But as a marketer, don't you think that's the biggest problem that you need to solve? So I'll give you a context. So for example, say whenever we talk to businesses, right? Typically say founders. Now they're so excited about that product that, okay, we have this, we have that, right? And you have to really, if to tell them that, okay, you have all of these things, but when you're doing a campaign, for example, a big bang campaign, you need to focus on this one
thing,
right?
Yeah.
But which I think is the toughest part because they don't want to lose out on other things, right? What's your take on that, and how do you deal with that? I'm sure you would have done, and I'm sure that you, in your last 24 years of experience, you would have come across a lot of these instances where you had to say, convince your bosses, that, okay, let's focus on this one. How do you go about that?
Or my bosses had to convince me, or agencies struggled with us because we didn't get it as clients.
Right.
It is the biggest thing to solve. And it comes down to awareness, right? It comes down to sacrifice. Because it's easy. It comes from insecurity. That if I throw 5 bullet points of reasons to believe at the consumer, at least one will stick.
One will stick, right?
Someone will buy me, right?
Yeah.
And so it takes great sacrifice and it takes great courage to pick that one thing you want to stand for. And I think it comes from conversations.
Exactly.
Right? And I've struggled that with my own business also, Performonks. And I'm still you know, I still every 3 months say, no, but should I stand for this or should performance stand for that?
Right.
So it is really incredibly difficult. And I think that's where conversations, deep self-awareness, not just about yourself, but about your business, and conversations with people who care, I guess, and who get it is super important.
Yeah. So, for example, in a lot of pitch work that we do, right? You have this slide which will talk about the perceptual map, right? Where you'll essentially map where are different brands on X and Y axis, right? I think that is such an important slide because you can't be a category of one in isolation, right? It always has to be as compared to, either in a certain context or for a brand for that category, what other brands are standing for, right? Because in isolation, you can be whatever. I mean, you can talk about 5 things. I feel, for example, if there's a brand, so we, for example, work for a solar company, right? And they have a very unique model where you don't have to pay any upfront investment, right? Typically, if you install for any business, if they have to install solar, they have to invest upfront, right? But they have a very unique model where you don't have to invest upfront, but you essentially pay like an EMI for next 60 months, right? But that's the only player in that category right now in terms of that model, right? Obviously, there are a lot of players offering solar services, panels, product, etc. But they're the only one. So I think they would be a category of one, but again, in that landscape, right? But if you are just like single unique brand in a category where nobody else is doing, then you can, I think, much as well talk about till the time you have a competition. Do you agree with that?
But even if you are, let's say you launched the first, let's say Paytm was the number one UPI at one point. Even they had to say only one thing because the human brain cannot grasp more than one thing. Even they said, transfer money, Paytm karo, finished. You don't need to say 5 things.
Right. So it also has to do with the consumer and how much can they grasp.
They don't care.
Yeah. And also I feel in this digital informational overloaded world that we are living in.
Yes.
Anyways, people have very less retention.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Rashi, another very important thing, I was talking to one of someone I met yesterday, and we were talking about this podcast, and someone very senior in the industry spoke about how classification of target audience in, say, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, that's irrelevant in the age that we're living in now, right? And his point of view was that in every tier 4 city, you have a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 audience, right? But as marketers, for example, in every brief, we would have, either you're targeting tier 1 to 3 or SEC, ABC, or say Google's the next billion people, right? You have India and Bharat, right? The different nomenclatures of looking at audience.
Right? Yes.
What is the right way of looking at it?
The right way again is context dependent. So let's look at the macro view of India. When you look at macro view of India, the first thing we have to, I think, look at is ability and willingness to buy. So even if I have the willingness to buy, I may not have the ability to buy.
Right.
That's where my top 1%, next 19%, next 40%, and next 40% come in. There are enough people who have written about this that show how your per capita income goes down. So even the top 1%'s per capita average income is 3,36,000 rupees per annum. Right? And then it goes way below. $2 a day is the above poverty line. So that becomes my ability to buy. Now, if I'm building a business with ability to buy and I want to go deep, like Parle-G, like Unilever, Then I create SKUs and distribution channel that takes me till there. Then I must be present at rupee 1. Right? This model can only work with essentials or technology, which has now become essential. So UPI is going there. Mobile phones are probably going there. The difference, they're sharing 1 GB data in a full family. Right? And even today, Airtel, Jio and all are selling 50 rupees per day ka schemes.
Right.
So that becomes my ability to buy, provided it's an essential item. Then you come to willingness to buy. What's happening in India is, because we are still very much a company on the rise, on the move. We are all moving up the aspirational ladder. Even if I have the ability to buy, I can't digest some products. For example, we live in metros. We love Japanese food. Chalo sushi mangate hain.
Right.
Somebody living in Rohtak could be in the top 1%. Because in India, very rightly you said that the top 1% is divided in the top 200 cities probably. So the person in Rohtak, he has the ability to buy sushi, but he won't. He will still probably have his paratha, dahi and pickle. And so slowly the willingness to buy will go deeper. So for example, Chings, they are making Indian Chinese. That can go. Because they are Indianizing the West.
But if, for example, we are talking about a digital first brand,
Okay.
right? Then obviously someone staying in Rohtak and is amongst the top 1%.
Yes.
Then he might as well be a
Yes,
target.
which is why Amazon and D2C is happening. And which is why people like Mamaearth, Dot & Key and all are saying that, 60% of my sale comes from non-tier 1 cities. So my tier 1 audience, my top 1% from tier 3 cities is buying me. Because I'm appealing to them in the search on Amazon. And the same companies, the minute they cross 100 crores, they have to go offline. Because the capacity of online is still that much. So 95% of personal care, FMCG, etc. is still offline. And that's where things start going south.
Yeah. It's actually very interesting, I'm seeing obviously legacy or physical first businesses going digital, but again, all these digital brands, they are also going the physical way, which I think has to do a lot with, beyond that 5% or 100 crores.
Yeah.
You have to go physical. Yeah. Also, in most of the organization that you've worked for, they are, or it would be wrong to say they're not now, but they've all been very distribution heavy. I mean, that was or that is one of their might.
Yes.
Right. And then we look at a recent example. So there are a couple of creators who came together who have probably, say, upwards of 10 million followers.
Okay.
Right? And they launched a wearable brand. Right. And apparently in 3 days, they clocked a revenue of 4 crores.
Wow.
This is all online.
All online.
Right. A year back, Boat actually failed in scaling their wearable category, which they also launched. Right. So what do you think about this? Is the distribution now lies with the creators of the world who have, say, millions of followers? And if that is the case, then should these large businesses look at creating this online distribution as well? Creator-led distribution?
Okay, so complicated question. No? So one was, just because 3 creators came together and launched a wearables brand and did 4 CR in 3 days doesn't mean this is a successful business model.
Okay.
Wait and watch. Right? Maybe the cream of their followers bought them.
Right.
Now they are any D2C business. Now they have to follow the rule book of building a D2C business. Can they scale to 100 crores? I'm sure they can. Right? So it's a good start. Can they build a long-term profitable business?
So it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
It's a marathon. Right? Should legacy businesses tie up with influencers? Yes, and I think they are.
Hmm.
Should they tie up with creators and say, let's launch a brand together? I think they should.
Hmm.
I don't know anyone who has, though. Do you know
I
anyone?
haven't come across it.
I think they should, right?
I mean, they're using them more as a distributor of content,
Yes.
but nothing
More as
beyond.
mouthpieces.
But
Yeah.
nothing beyond that.
Yeah. And now, if you're a big enough creator like Kardashian sisters, you are being able to create billion-dollar brands. Now, those are businesses that have sustained, right? So, India still needs to see that model.
Yeah.
Boat wearable didn't work. I don't know. Maybe because Boat is known to be a tech brand, headsets and so on. Maybe people didn't accept apparel. So I don't know what went wrong there.
No, by wearable, I meant these
watches.
digital one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, even I don't know the reason, but I saw one of the videos recently where Aman was talking about how this didn't work out so well.
Yeah. I think because watches are more substantial purchases, no? Earpods and all, 1500 ka earpod hai.
Yeah.
Ghadi to is an important accessory. I think. I don't know.
Got it. Great. So, Rashi, let's shift the gears a bit, and we have a very interesting segment which we call the rapid fire round. So, I have got some interesting questions. The only caveat is that you cannot take a lot of time to answer
God.
them.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll start off. Which is one new age brand that you love? You absolutely love. And you can't say Mukobra.
Indian?
Yeah, Indian.
None.
None? Okay.
Nothing's coming to mind.
Which is one brand that you hate?
None. ये नहीं हो रहा है, rapid fire नहीं हो रहा है.
But I mean,
दिमाग नहीं चल रहा.
As marketers, I feel you're always, criticizing, or you see opportunity. So I'll turn it around. Do you see any brand, new age brand, where you see a lot of opportunity, but they're not leveraging that? Probably.
Okay, I'll tell you. The brand that I love is the Minimalist.
Right.
I think although they are a copycat of The Ordinary, but I really liked the way they have structured their brand. I like the brand. I don't love it.
Do you use it?
Yes, I use it. The brand that I think has a lot of opportunity, I think the Whole Truth started strong, but I kind of feel they're running out of stories now. And I just think also the D2C space for food is quite limited. So I worry that they may have hit a ceiling.
Yeah. I mean, expanding their portfolio, but...
Yeah, it's all horizontal, but there's no depth.
Yeah. Which is the brand that you would want to turn around?
Oh, Fab India.
Fab India? Why?
Yes. I think the roots of Fab India were very powerful. A foreigner who comes in, spots the opportunity with local artisans and turns it into contemporary wear. And again, like Lakme, the brand has now slowed down and it's no longer contemporary.
Yeah.
There are many other brands playing the artisan route. So I think this is a brand that people remember fondly.
Yeah.
We used to always go there for kurta pajamas, saris.
Somewhere I also feel that Fab India has become a bit intimidating.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I see physical stores, but the kind of footfall that they have. And on the other hand, I see some new age brands. I think there's one called Safed or something, right?
Oh.
Which is like all white largely.
Okay.
But say Saif Ali Khan is buying from them and wearing it.
Yeah.
I think it's all organic because they're not big enough to afford a Saif Ali Khan. But yeah, they're treading into somewhere into Fab India's,
yes.
shoes. But I too agree, Fab India can be a great target.
I think it needs revitalization. It has the assets.
Yeah. Okay. And when you hire someone, right, as a CMO, what are the three things that you look at? And let's keep aside the skill aspect, given that, now in marketing you have experts in different things, but what are the three attributes that you essentially look at?
I think the ability to learn is very important, especially because the world is changing so fast. Marketing is changing so fast. Ability to learn, genuinely learning ability. both intellectually and by doing. Because in today's day and age, you can learn marketing by doing.
Right.
Get there, make the Facebook ad and so on. I think the second thing is communication. It is so important to communicate well, verbally and in writing. And
If you're living in a ChatGPT era, then
even then, you've got to communicate what ChatGPT tells you. I mean, you need to enunciate clearly, you need to articulate, you need to be short, don't ramble. You know, even if someone's feeding you, speak well, write well, right?
But nobody wants to write lately, you know. Everyone is going back to this ChatGPTs of the world.
Yeah. And you know, it probably comes from fear of the blank piece of paper. And I've seen this so much.
Explain, I mean, tell me about it.
Creating something from scratch is always more difficult than critiquing something or taking something and tweaking it and putting it out there. But if you take a blank sheet of paper and say, go write a product idea, write an essay on a cow, you know, it's intimidating to create from scratch. So that's probably the third thing. I want builders, you know, throwers and dinkers, as they say. So.
Right. And what are the three things on account of which you'll fire a person?
Sense of entitlement. So opposite of that, sense of entitlement, lazy, just lazy, and people who just exist and who don't grow, you know, fixed mindsets. So lack of will. Lack of will.
And Rashi, I see a lot of marketeers now talking about AI all the time, right? In different aspects, right? From majorly from content creation, or image generation, video generation perspective.
Yes.
What's your take on that? I feel it is detrimental to a marketing's or a marketeer's job because that's the wrong thing in which they're really applying their brains. Whereas you can use, you know, such tools for efficiency, better workflows, removing inefficiency, especially which exist in, you know, large organization. But I don't see that, at least till now. So what's your take on that?
I think this again goes back to the stuff we were talking about in the beginning, where more and more marketeers have been reduced to communication heads. So if you're in a communication role, you will think of AI as a communication tool. And even if your team goes away because of AI, you will still remain if you're the marketing head. Maybe not, I don't know. But yes, it is risky. But if I think of myself as a communications person, I will think of AI as an image generator and copywriter. But if I think of myself as a marketeer who creates products for unmet needs, I will start integrating AI to improve my product.
But if you're a marketeer with the mandate of, say, take care of communication, right? Which I think at Amazon, that was one of your mandate, right?
Yes.
How do you think about that mandate, and does your priority change as compared to, say, when you're also looking at, say, product development, product innovation, etc.?
So tech products, you know, I was just listening to a podcast yesterday where a product manager has created AI that will write code for you. So it will create a half good product out of coding, and then you can take it forward. So I think AI is useful in where it can work as an intern, and so many people have said this, but I'm just repeating it, where it can do the basic part of your job, and then if you can then uplift it and make it better. So I think in tech products, it can be used to write code. If you are creating content at scale, like we were on Ask Nestle, or like we would create for Amazon, performance marketing, you have to create 1,000 creatives a day. AI will be useful there, right? But you need intelligent humans to handle the prompt engineering. Right.
So just to wrap this up, Rashi, what are a few things that you would suggest to marketeers who are out there, right? And you've been, I think, at the holy grail of marketing at some of these organizations like Unilever and PepsiCo, Coke, right? What would be your 3 suggestions for marketeers?
I think they would be similar to the 3 suggestions of who I would hire for. I think, always keep learning because things are changing so
So
fast.
fast, yeah.
Be curious, be always learning, and learn to do things with your hands. Yeah, and learn the business. It's all about growing the business, not about making ads.
Ads, yeah. That's so important and so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great, Rashi. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
this. Thank you
Thanks.
for taking out time. And I think and I hope everyone would love our conversation. You had some interesting nuggets from, all the experience you had. And yeah, I look forward to reading more stories at your newsletter.
Thanks for having me over.
Yeah.
All the best.
Thank you.